Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Lachlan from Lachlan Likes a Thing, and I thought for a change of pace I would do an analysis of an album today. Oftentimes it's said that the advantage of high resolution audio files is not the technical advantage of higher sampling rates or bit depths, but the benefit of improved mastering quality with the new re-releases.
You know, you listen to the CD, it's like listening to someone twinging on a fucking rubber band.
Sometimes though, you hear people complaining that some high-resolution remasters are barely any different from CD quality because there was never enough high-resolution data captured in the original recordings, or that the remaster actually sounds worse because of things like dynamic range compression. So for fun, I thought we could look at the 2013 192 kHz 24-bit high-resolution re-release of the soundtrack of End of Evangelion as a case study, because it demonstrates both sides of this argument, and also because I'm a hopeless Ava geek that spent $35 on this album, and I want to make some money back. Note that this video will contain some minor spoilers for the movie. So let's start by talking briefly about the music. The End of Evangelion is the soundtrack to the 1997 anime film of the same name, with music written by the series composer Shiro Sagisu. It's a landmark and brutal movie with some really unusual soundtrack choices, with battle sequences accompanied by classical music, an end of the world sequence played alongside a pop song about suicide, and even a live action sequence with no dialogue accompanied by J.S. Bach. Call it affection by association, but there are some tracks that I absolutely adore on this album, and as we get into the specific analysis of the remaster, I'll play some of them for reference. Now, usually Japanese sound engineers are considered to be quite meticulous with their mastering, and in this case, we are dealing with an anime that attracted death threats for the director, so I was curious as to what kind of improvements they could wring out of the remaster. I bought the high-resolution re-release from mora.jp, which is a Japanese digital music store fronted primarily by Sony. The album cost 3,240 yen, which is roughly 35 Australian dollars, and for comparison, the 320 kilobit per second AAC version, also available on the store, costs 1,543 yen, or just under half the price. Note that mora.jp is a Japanese store that reportedly only accepts Japanese credit cards, but using a VPN, I was able to make a purchase on my card with no problem. Your mileage may vary. So let's look at some tracks, and I'm going to be using the translated English titles to refer to them. The first track on the album is Outside Interference, which is the ominous and slightly shambolic orchestral track that accompanies the invasion of Nerve headquarters by an outside force. Now, from the very first track, I could hear the difference with the remaster. For one thing, the remastered version is louder. It also sounded to me as if the high frequencies were more emphasized in the remaster, and there were some elements in the remaster that were more noticeable. It seems to me that a deliberate choice was made to emphasize the raw sound of the orchestra, so it sounded more like a recording and less like background music. This makes sense because the original release was meant to play in the background of a film and not distract people, whereas the re-release would be targeted towards audiophiles who would enjoy hearing these extra details. Throwing the files into Audacity immediately confirms my first impressions. The original CD release is on the top, the remaster is on the bottom. You can immediately see that the remaster is louder, but it also appears that there's some dynamic range compression being applied. The peaks are closer in volume, and it appears that in general the softer sounds are now louder. Now, one of the advantages we often hear about with high resolution audio is that higher bit depths allow for greater dynamic range, but you can see that in this remaster the opposite has occurred. The dynamic range has been reduced, either through dynamic range compression in order to bring up previously hard to hear details, or as a result of those details being EQ'd louder in the mix. We can put a rough number on the amount of the reduction in dynamic range by running these files through the music analysis software Musicscope. The original release gets an LRA figure of 9.7, while the re-release gets an LRA figure of 8.9, which means that the overall macro dynamic range of the recording has been reduced by 0.8 decibels. Please note that the loudness range algorithm only provides a figure for overall macro dynamic range between the loudest and softest parts of the recording, and it is designed to reject the softest 10% and the loudest 5% of a recording. It doesn't say anything about the microdynamic range or the relative volumes of instruments playing at the same time. You can read more about the LRA from the white paper that I've linked in the description of this video. It's a pretty interesting algorithm. In all the brouhaha about the loudness wars, dynamic range compression is often painted as a demon. Excessive dynamic range compression can be a bad thing if overused, but it is important to remember that compression can be used to achieve specific aesthetic effects. For example, the recording of my voice you are listening to now has been compressed to make me sound smoother and more authoritative. In this case, perceived detail in an audio track is being enhanced by a lower dynamic range because it's now easier to hear the softer sounds. Personally, I think it's a subtle effect, which I don't mind.
How disgusting.
Now let's talk about another track, The Flow of Emptiness, which is the 7th track on the album. This is the score for the sequence where Oscar is being brutally attacked by the new Ava series. It is one of my favorite tracks on the album. The same reduction in dynamic range can be observed here, with the original track getting an LRA of 16, while the remaster gets an LRA of 14.1. What's also very interesting is that running the recording through Musicscope, you can see that this is a 192 kHz file, so the maximum frequency that can be encoded is 96 kHz. But the microphones used for this recording didn't really capture much data above 24 kHz. In fact, I suspect that the data above 24 kHz in this recording is artificial high-frequency harmonics that have been added in the remaster through software. I'm no expert in this, but the harmonics look very regular and symmetrical to me, and they don't look very natural. Now, if you know better, please leave a comment because this is an area that interests me. Now, again, one of the supposed advantages of high-resolution music is that it allows for very high frequencies to be encoded into an audio file. The CD sample rate of 44 kHz was chosen because it was assumed that human beings simply can't hear above 22 kHz. But even if they could, it's important to remember that just because a file has a sampling rate of 192 kHz doesn't mean that the microphones in that recording ever captured any high-frequency data, as this recording demonstrates.
All reading's negative. Numerical expression is impossible.
Sweet Jesus, it's an anti-AT field.
Lastly, we can look at the track number 11 on the album, Com Sousa Todd. This song plays during the end of the world sequence in the movie, and it's probably one of the more cheerful pop songs about suicide. Com Sousa Todd is German for Come Sweet Death. 2 fun facts. Number 1, the opening chord progression from this song is a musical reference to Pachelbel's Canon, which is the musical motif that runs throughout the first Evangelion movie, Death and Rebirth. Second fun fact, I always try to sing this song in karaoke.
down. I've been a fool to myself. I thought that I could live for no one else.
So, when we look at the original track in Musicscope, we can see a bit of a problem. This track repeatedly hits full-scale volume, represented by the red areas in this scope. If we look in Audacity, we can see that a few of these peaks are being clipped. Clipping occurs when a sound gets too loud to be encoded in an audio file, and that data is lost or literally clipped off the peak. It's an easy thing for a studio engineer to avoid, but you'll notice it occurs in a lot of music releases these days, sometimes for particular effect.
In a French-ass restaurant, hurry up with my damn croissants!
The good news is that the clipping in Com Sousa Todd is removed in the 2013 remaster, as you would hope for $35. Dynamic range has been reduced from 5.2 to 4.9 on the LRA metric, and everything just sounds shinier. And that just about sums up the entire remaster. None of the tracks clip anymore, dynamic range is reduced slightly on every track, and everything just has a bit more high frequency detail, at least perceptually. So is this HD remaster worth getting? $35 is very expensive for an album with only some very subtle differences. Now, I was happy to pay for it out of curiosity. They've cleaned up the rough edges on the original recordings, but it's probably only worth it if you are one of the most die-hard of fans, like me. So I hope that this has given you some insight into what you might find in a HD remaster of an album, though of course this is only one example. Let me know if you found this sort of video interesting, and of course I'd love to hear your comments. I wish that I could turn back time, 'cause now the guilt is all mine. Can't live without the trust from those you love.